Hello everyone, this is Jason from Primetime Aquatics. So happy you are here. We are doing a beginner's guide to African cichlids. This is not meant to be an all-encompassing list of things and list of fish. We will have species profiles down in the description for you if you want more information. Something to keep in mind with all these fish, or at least most of them from the African Great Lakes, they do like water that is a higher pH. They do like harder water. So if you have those water parameters, these can be a great option for you. I've organized the list based on lakes, Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, and we will also talk about a couple options from the non-Great Lakes, West African cichlids, as well as the riverine cichlids. Thank you so much for being here. Hope you enjoy the video. So we are going to start out with cichlids from Lake Malawi because they tend to be the most common and certainly the most colorful. From Lake Malawi, you've got two main types of cichlids. You have the mbuna and you have the peacock/haps. The reason they are so popular, as you're going to see throughout this video, is absolutely outstanding color. Now, the mbuna tend to have more solid colors, and the colors tend to be a lot brighter. And the nice thing about those is both the males and the females will often show really nice color. For the peacocks, the males have all the color, and the females tend to be more drab, brown, or silver, or gray. Both of them, there is some aggression issues between the mbuna and the peacocks and haps, and so you do have to have some fish keeping experience before you jump into the cichlid world. I would say the mbuna cichlids are going to be a little bit easier to manage the aggression. They tend to stay a little bit smaller than peacocks. As long as you've got a 40-gallon breeder or a 55-gallon, often you can keep a group of mbuna cichlids. For the peacocks, I highly recommend a minimum of a 75-gallon, but I really think that 6 foot 125 or 150 is a much better option for the peacock cichlids. Now, again, these are both awesome fish, both full of color. There are lots of different types, and so as you're going through and you're making note of which African cichlids you might want to keep at some point, definitely want to do your research. We've got full species profiles down in the description below for a lot of different types of cichlids, but not all mbuna behave the same way. Not all peacock cichlids behave the same way. Some are much more aggressive than others, but both can be very rewarding to keep. One thing that is very common for people who like to keep peacock cichlids is they'll often keep them in male-only tanks. That's because the males are the ones that show all the color. Sometimes that can help reduce aggression. If you do intend on keeping females, whether it's with the peacock cichlids or the mbuna, highly recommend for every male you have at least 4 to 5 females. That's going to spread out any mating aggression that the male is going to have towards the females and just makes the community a lot more stable. The peacocks will have a tendency to hybridize, so be careful there. You don't want to be selling hybrids or giving hybrids away to fish stores if you don't really know who the parents are. But these are great fish. Again, be aware that these fish can have some aggression issues, but I actually think the mbuna are less aggressive. If you are looking to keep a Lake Malawi tank and you want to have mbuna cichlids, some really good suggestions would be yellow labs, rusty cichlids, Pseudotropheus silosi. Those tend to be the least aggressive of the mbuna. Definitely stay away from the Aratus and the Damasceni. Those are very aggressive. On the peacock side, they mostly behave the same. Every once in a while, you'll get some OB cichlids that are a little bit more aggressive. OB are the orange and blue blotched ones that you're seeing periodically throughout this video. But good suggestions might be the lemon jake, maybe the Eureka red cichlid. Those tend to be a little bit smaller and not quite so aggressive. Next up, and I think next on the popularity list, are the Lake Tanganyikan cichlids. These happen to be some of my favorite. Lake Tanganyikan cichlids look very different than the Lake Malawi cichlids, and there's a lot of variety in terms of overall size and shape of the fish. Now, the Lake Tanganyikan cichlids, unlike the fish from Lake Malawi, I think that they're a little bit more sensitive to water parameters. They don't ship as well. They don't travel as well. They tend to get a little bit more stressed out and sick if temperature changes happen, where the Lake Malawi cichlids tend to be some of the more hardy of everything we're going to talk about today. The Lake Tanganyikan tend to be the least hardy, but don't let that scare you away from keeping them. If you can give them stable water parameters, they tend to be pretty awesome fish. First up on the list, and I think probably the most popular Lake Tanganyikan cichlids, are the shell dwellers. There are lots of different types. The multis otherwise known as Neolamprologus multifasciatus, is probably one of the most common, not probably, it is. And these fish only reach about 1 inch to 1.25 inches. They tend to tolerate one another well. With these shell dwellers, I like to keep them in a species-only tank. And with the shell dwellers, often a 20-gallon is all that you're ever going to need. A lot of the shell dwellers breed readily, and so that's pretty exciting to see. The gold ocellatus tend to be the most colorful. A lot of the Lake Tanganyika fish tend to be kind of a silvery color, but they also have a lot of iridescence to them. Tons of personality. This is a great fish. So if you don't have a large tank, the shell dwellers might be an option. Just put a half a dozen in an aquarium. Let them start to breed. Just a reminder, lots of species profiles down in the description below. If you think you see a fish that you're really interested in, you'll get a lot more information there on how to keep them, how to breed them. So you've got the shell dwellers. The next one on the list for our Lake Tanganyikan fish are the rock-dwelling cichlids. And these are great fish too, and they don't get very large, usually going to max out right around 4 inches or so. Tend to be pretty thin-bodied fish. They can have a little bit more color like the Julidochromis ornatus, the Reagani, the Transcriptus. These are really great fish, not overly aggressive, certainly not towards one another. And you're generally going to have less aggression issues with the fish from Lake Tanganyika compared to the fish from Lake Malawi. Just like the shell dwellers, a lot of our rock dwellers will do fine in a 20-gallon or larger. Again, they really like to be kept in species-only tanks. If you want to start mixing the Lake Tanganyikan fish together, I highly recommend get a larger tank, like a 40-gallon breeder or a 55-gallon. That's going to give them a little bit more space, and it's going to give them an opportunity to reproduce and have some of those fries survive. So rock dwellers are really awesome. From there, you've got some of what I like to call more of the open water swimmers. One of the most common is the Neolamprologus burchardi. Be really careful with this fish. They absolutely love to breed, and once they do, they can overrun a tank. And so sometimes, even though they're really common, I often don't recommend them. A better option, if you're looking for an open water fish, maybe to complement your shell dwellers, would be something like a featherfin cichlid or Cyprichromis leptosoma. Now, I will say the Lake Tanganyikan cichlids tend to be a lot more expensive than the Lake Malawi cichlids. Less common, a lot more money. So even the shell dwellers, it's not uncommon to see those go for $10, $15, $20 a piece. Some of the fish like the Cyprichromis might be $15 to $30 a piece. Some of the really expensive feather fins, they might be $80 to $100 a piece, depending on the type of fish. The Lake Tanganyikan cichlids can get quite large. The Frontosa would be a great example. So if you're looking for a really large fish, Frontosa can get close to a foot. They also like to be kept in large groups, and because of that, I highly recommend at least an 8-foot tank for Frontosas. But a lot of these other Lake Tanganyikan fish can be kept in much smaller aquariums. Like I said, anywhere from 20 to 55 gallons, as you're seeing throughout this video. A lot of people ask, can you mix the Lake Tanganyikan and Lake Malawi cichlids together? People have done it. I've done it in the past. It's not something I really recommend, just because they do have different personalities. They do have different ways of communicating with one another in a group. A lot of the Lake Tanganyikan fish are much smaller than the Lake Malawi fish, and so there is an opportunity there for some of the fish to get bullied, and so just keep that in mind. I prefer to keep the Lake Malawis separate from the Lake Tanganyikans. And taking a step further back to the Lake Malawi, I would prefer to keep my Mbuna separate from my peacock cichlids. The Mbuna tend to be a little bit more aggressive towards peacock cichlids, and they often will win that aggression fight. And it's just not something I like to see. The last lake we're going to talk about is Lake Victoria. I have one example here. This is the tomato hap species 35, and I use this one example because it illustrates pretty much what you're going to see throughout all the Lake Victorian cichlids. You're going to get a male that is going to be very, very colorful, like you're seeing here. And then you're going to get a lot of females that are going to be roughly the tan or the silver color or the gray color, depending on the species. Now, with these particular fish, again, usually if you've got more than one male, the dominant male is going to color up really nicely, and a lot of the subdominants aren't going to show much color at all, just like you're seeing throughout here. There are lots of different types of Lake Victoria cichlids. A lot of them, the males are different colors than what you're seeing here, but they have basically like someone took a box of Skittles and threw it at the fish. There's a ton of color. The species 44 is an amazing fish, the obliquidans. I will say these tend to be fairly aggressive fish. Sometimes I will mix my Lake Victorians with my Lake Malawis. It's worked sometimes, sometimes it doesn't. This is a very specialty fish, in my opinion, where a lot of times people will just keep one male with 4 or 5 females, maybe a couple males, depending on the size of the tank. Males can sometimes be really hard on one another. I would say even more aggressive than the Lake Malawis and certainly the Lake Tanganyika. So if you're into and thinking about the Lake Victoria cichlids, this is one where you've really got to be on your game trying to manage aggression, because they can be very rough on one another, but the colors are unmatched compared to anything we've talked about so far. Wanted to give you just a couple more examples, but these fish are either from satellite lakes or the river systems in Africa. Sometimes they are from West Africa. These are things like the jewel cichlids. Here you're looking at Hemichromis exual, which is a cousin of the jewel cichlid. Absolutely amazing looking fish. You can see a lot of color here. And then you've got fish like the crebensis. Now these fish are a little different than what we've talked about so far, because the cichlids from the Great Lakes, that's the lakes, Lake Malawi, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Victoria, they tend to like very hard water with a high pH. But the West African cichlids, some of the riverine cichlids like the jewels, and certainly the crebensis, they don't mind water being closer to a pH of 7, and water that is going to be, well, not on the harder side, so maybe moderately hard water to even in some cases softer water. So these fish, aggression levels, the crebensis, very, very easy to keep, tend not to be super aggressive. These are fish that I've actually kept in community tanks with other types of fish, and as long as the fish aren't small enough to be eaten, they tend to be ignored. The jewel cichlids, on the other hand, can be a little bit aggressive, although I've kept them in groups with one another and had no problems. You can keep them sometimes with larger community fish, provided that we're talking about maybe larger tetras or barbs, but they will eat smaller fish, and sometimes they can be a little bit aggressive with one another. Both of them are relatively easy to breed, usually not very expensive. Crebensis, in fact, can be downright cheap, somewhere around $4 or $5. And the jewel cichlids, depending on where you buy them, they can also be relatively inexpensive, around that same price point. And so if you have softer water and your pH isn't above a pH of 8 or so, the West African cichlids, the riverine African cichlids might be an option. Again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. If you want some more information on some of the fish that we featured in this video, check out the description below. We'll have the species profiles for you there. In the future, I plan to do a little bit more with each lake and give you some more in-depth information there. So if that's interesting to you, let me know that in the comments section. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.